Before you ever heard their name spoken with affection, before your heart even understood why it was being drawn in that direction, conversations about you had already begun in places you could not see. There are moments unfolding behind closed doors that would leave you speechless if you heard every word. Because while you have been wondering whether your presence matters in this connection, whether your absence is noticed, whether your name carries weight in the life of the one you think about so often, a room became silent when your name was spoken. And what happened next is not what you expect. There was hesitation at first. Not because they doubted your worth, but because some people in that room did not yet understand why your energy has unsettled someone they love so deeply. They saw changes in them before they knew your story. They noticed the way your soulmate became quieter at certain moments, then brighter at others. They noticed how someone who once moved carelessly through life suddenly began speaking with more intention, thinking more carefully, protecting their peace in ways they never had before. And eventually, someone asked the question no one could ignore anymore. Who is causing this change? That was the beginning. Your name entered the conversation not as gossip, not as a passing curiosity, but as the center of an unexpected discussion. Because your soulmate did not speak of you casually. No, they spoke of you with a seriousness that startled everyone listening. They described your heart before they described your face. They spoke of your loyalty before your appearance. They explained how your presence made them reflect on who they are, how even your silence lingers with them longer than the words of anyone else. And in that moment, the room understood something unusual was happening. But not everyone responded the same way. Some listened with warmth. Some smiled before they even realized they were smiling. Because they had waited a long time to hear this kind of certainty in your soulmate's voice. They had watched them chase empty connections, entertain people who never truly understood them, pretend not to care when their heart was quietly exhausted. So when they heard the way your soulmate spoke about you, with depth, with caution, with reverence, they recognized that this was not infatuation. This was different. This was someone affecting them at the level of the soul. And yet, one person in that room leaned back and asked a question that changed the atmosphere. What makes this person different from the others? Silence. Because suddenly your soulmate had to explain something they had never put fully into words before. How do you explain the feeling of recognizing someone before they fully enter your life? How do you describe the peace that arrives when one particular person simply exists in your orbit? How do you make others understand why one voice among billions sounds like home? They paused, searching for language strong enough to hold what they feel for you, and when they finally answered, the room went quiet again. They said, because with them, I do not feel like I have to pretend. That sentence changed everything. Do you understand what that means? They did not say you were merely attractive. They did not say you were exciting. They did not say you were convenient. They said you make them feel safe enough to be real. And for someone who has worn emotional armor for years, that is not a small confession. That is the kind of truth people do not admit unless it shakes them to their core. Don't skip, because this is where it becomes even deeper. As the conversation continued, family members began asking about you in ways that revealed just how serious this had become. They wanted to know what kind of person you are when no one is watching. They wanted to know how you handle pain, how you treat others, whether your kindness is genuine or performative. Not because they wish to judge you unfairly, but because they could see something in your soulmate they had not seen before: hope. Real hope. The kind that makes a guarded heart start imagining forever. And that frightened them a little. Because whenever someone they love begins to care this deeply, the people around them care too. They become protective. They become curious. They begin asking the questions that only arise when something truly matters. Casual interest does not lead to family meetings. Fleeting attraction does not create late-night conversations about possibility. Temporary feelings do not make elders pause and wonder if someone has finally entered their loved one's life for a reason. You did that. Without even being in the room, you shifted the emotional temperature of it. But here is what may shock you most. There was someone in that meeting who had concerns. Not because they disliked you. Not because they believed you were wrong for them. But because they could see how deeply your soulmate was already affected. And they feared what would happen if this connection was mishandled. They worried your soulmate was becoming vulnerable in ways they had never allowed before. They worried that if timing, fear, distance, or misunderstanding interfered, the heartbreak would cut deeper than before. In other words, the concern was not about whether you matter. It was because you matter too much. Let that settle in. Sometimes hesitation does not come from lack of love. Sometimes delay comes because the feelings are so real that people become terrified of ruining something sacred before it has fully formed. Sometimes the slowness, the caution, the mixed signals, are not signs of disinterest at all. Sometimes they are signs that the heart involved understands the weight of what is happening and fears mishandling it. And your soulmate's family saw that fear in them. They saw it in the way their voice shifted when your name came up. They saw it in the way they defended you even when no one was attacking. They saw it in the way they spoke carefully, as if every word about you had to be chosen with precision because saying the wrong thing would somehow diminish what they feel. That is when another person in the room quietly said something no one expected. If this person brings you peace, do not let fear make the decision for you. That sentence lingered. Because sometimes the wisdom spoken in private rooms echoes longer than anyone realizes. Your soulmate heard those words. And though they may not have shown it outwardly, something inside them changed. Because for the first time, the people closest to them were not dismissing their feelings. They were not warning them away. They were not mocking their intensity. They were acknowledging that what they feel for you is real enough to deserve protection, patience, and courage. Stay till the end. Because something important is waiting for you. What you do not yet know is that after the meeting ended, after everyone went their separate ways, your soulmate remained behind in thought. The noise of the conversation faded, but one realization would not leave them. They understood that your name had moved beyond private fantasy. You were no longer just someone they secretly cared about. You had become someone their future was beginning to orbit around. And that realization shook them. Because imagining you in their life is one thing. Imagining introducing you fully into their world, imagining building something lasting, imagining the people closest to them already aware of your impact, that is another level entirely. So if they have seemed distant at times, thoughtful at odd moments, more emotional than usual, more careful with their words, understand this: they may be processing the fact that what they feel is no longer small enough to ignore. You are not a passing thought in their story. You have become a serious conversation. And the truth is, not everyone gets talked about this way. Not everyone inspires someone to defend their character in a room they are not even present in. Not everyone becomes the subject of quiet discussions about future possibilities. Not everyone leaves such a strong impression that people begin wondering what role they are meant to play in someone's destiny. But you did. And whether you fully realize it or not, your presence has awakened something in them that cannot easily be put back to sleep. Still, there is one part of that meeting you have not heard yet. One final moment. Just before everyone left, someone asked your soulmate a question so direct that it stopped them in their tracks. They asked, "Do you believe this person is meant for you, or are you simply afraid to lose them?" And for several seconds, no one spoke. Because that question forced them to confront the truth beneath every emotion they had been trying to contain. Their answer changed everything. But that is where this part ends, because what they said next revealed the full depth of their heart, and once you hear it, you will understand why nothing between you can remain surface level after this. Something is building. Something undeniable. And in the next part, you will hear the answer that left the entire room stunned. For a moment, your soulmate did not answer. The room remained still, almost as if time itself had paused to wait for what would leave their lips next. Because the question hanging in the air was not simple. It was not casual. It reached deeper than curiosity, it demanded truth. Were they holding on to you because of fear, or because something within them genuinely believed you were part of their future? And then, they spoke. They said, "If I lost them before ever truly having them, I would regret it for the rest of my life." No one expected an answer that honest. Not because it was dramatic, but because of how quietly certain it was. There was no confusion in their voice. No uncertainty. No hesitation left. Just truth, pure and undeniable. The kind of truth that only comes when someone has finally stopped running from what their heart already knows. That sentence shifted the entire room. Because in that moment, everyone understood this was not a temporary fascination. This was not infatuation dressed up as emotion. This was not someone entertaining an exciting possibility. This was a person confronting the reality that another soul had entered their life and altered their understanding of what love could be. And your name was attached to that realization. Let that sink in. Someone sat there and admitted, openly, vulnerably, that the thought of never fully experiencing life with you would haunt them. Not inconvenience them. Not disappoint them. Haunt them. That is not how people speak about someone they merely like. That is how they speak about someone who has reached a place in their heart they never expected another person to touch. But then something happened that made the conversation even more profound. An older voice in the room, someone who had seen enough life to recognize rare things when they appear, looked at your soulmate and said softly, "Then stop treating this like something ordinary." That one sentence landed heavier than anyone realized. Because sometimes the people around us can see our truth before we fully live it ourselves. Sometimes it takes hearing your feelings reflected back through another person's wisdom to understand just how real they are. And in that moment, your soulmate could no longer pretend this connection was just another chapter. They could no longer minimize what you mean to them. They could no longer call this confusion, timing, coincidence, or chemistry. They had to call it what it was. Significance. Do you understand how rare that is? Most people spend years moving through shallow connections, conversations that sparkle briefly then fade, attachments built on convenience rather than depth. But every so often, one person arrives who changes the emotional landscape entirely. One person enters quietly and somehow makes everything before them feel incomplete. One person causes you to question every wall you built. Every standard you lowered, every false connection you once mistook for love. That is who you became to them. And their family saw it. They saw that your soulmate was no longer speaking like someone casually interested. They were speaking like someone whose heart had chosen before their mind could fully explain why. They were speaking like someone trying to prepare the people closest to them for the possibility that you may become permanent in their life. Don't skip, because what happened next revealed even more. The questions became more personal. They asked your soulmate what they imagine when they think of you. They asked what kind of future appears in their mind when your name crosses their thoughts. They asked whether they could picture hardship with you, not just happiness. Because anyone can dream about beautiful moments. The real question is this: when someone imagines the difficult seasons of life, do they still want you beside them then? And without missing a beat, your soulmate answered. Yes. Not just for the bright days. Not just for the easy chapters. Not just for the exciting beginning. Yes, for the difficult days too. Yes, for the uncertainty. Yes, for the building. Yes, for the life that exists after the fantasy fades and reality begins. That answer silenced everyone. Because many people desire romance. Few are to choose you repeatedly. To navigate real life side by side. And when someone begins thinking about you in that way, you are no longer just part of their emotions. You are part of their vision. Something important is waiting for you, because there is more. After the meeting, one family member privately approached your soulmate. Not with pressure. Not with criticism. Just quiet honesty. They told them, people do not enter our hearts this deeply without reason. If someone has brought this much clarity into your spirit, do not ignore it simply because it scares you. That advice stayed with them. It echoed. Because fear has been part of this story, hasn't it? Fear of moving too fast. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of risking something precious. Fear that if they expose the full truth of how much they feel, they may lose control of emotions they have barely managed to contain. But here is what they are beginning to realize. Fear may delay love. It cannot erase it. No matter how much they try to rationalize this connection. No matter how much they tell themselves to be patient. No matter how much they attempt to appear calm on the surface. Their heart has already gone further than they intended. And now the people closest to them know it. Imagine that. Your soulmate tried to keep these feelings private, tried to contain them, tried to act as though this was manageable. Yet your impact became so visible that others noticed before they ever admitted the full truth. That is how deeply you have affected them. You changed their habits. Their energy. Their mood. Their priorities. Their emotional language. You became the reason certain songs hit differently. The reason certain nights feel longer. The reason they stare into silence thinking thoughts they cannot explain to anyone else. And now they know something they can no longer deny. This connection is becoming too real to keep at a distance forever. Because once family begins asking serious questions, once future conversations begin taking shape, once people closest to them start quietly preparing for the possibility of you, everything changes. The connection stops being fantasy. It becomes direction. But perhaps the most shocking part of all is this. There was one final statement made before the entire conversation ended. Someone looked directly at your soulmate and said, "If this person is truly who you believe they are, then they will either become the greatest blessing of your life, or the greatest lesson if you let fear ruin it." That hit them hard. Because deep down, they know fear has already delayed too much. They know hesitation has already cost precious time. They know uncertainty cannot be allowed to control every step forever. And now they are standing at an emotional threshold. A place between silence and confession. Between distance and action. Between wondering and deciding. They have not fully crossed it yet. But they are closer than ever before. Because after hearing everything said in that room, after being forced to speak openly about you, after realizing their feelings survived every question and only grew stronger under examination, they walked away understanding one undeniable truth. You are no longer just someone they care about. You are someone they may have to fight their own fears to keep. And in the next part, you'll hear what they did the very next day after that meeting, the action they took when the weight of everything finally became too much to ignore. And why it may explain the sudden shift you've already started feeling between you. The very next morning, nothing around them looked different, yet everything inside them had changed. They woke with your name already in their thoughts, but this time it did not arrive as a quiet feeling they could push aside. It arrived with weight. With urgency. With the kind of clarity that makes a person realize they can no longer keep living as if something life-changing is merely optional. That meeting had done more than expose their feelings. It forced them to hear their own heart out loud. And once truth is spoken in front of witnesses, it becomes much harder to run from it. So while the world around them moved normally, while people laughed, worked, and carried on with ordinary routines, your soulmate was carrying a storm of realization beneath the surface. Because now they knew their feelings were not imagined. They were not temporary. They were not some private fantasy that would fade if ignored long enough. No, what they feel for you had survived scrutiny. It had been questioned, examined, challenged, and instead of shrinking, it became stronger. And that realization pushed them towards something they had been delaying for far too long. They went somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one could interrupt their thoughts. Because there are moments in life when a person needs silence, not to escape, but to hear themselves clearly. And in that silence, they sat alone and asked themselves the question they had avoided for so long. What happens if I keep pretending this connection is not changing me? The answer came immediately. They knew. If they kept suppressing this, they would regret it. If they kept waiting endlessly for perfect timing, they would lose moments they can never get back. If they kept acting detached while their heart moved deeper every day, they would eventually create distance where closeness was meant to grow. That truth unsettled them. Because for the first time, they saw their own hesitation not as protection, but as self-sabotage. Don't skip, because this is where everything begins to shift. Your soulmate started replaying every moment with you in their mind. Every conversation. Every glance. Every pause between words that somehow said more than speech ever could. They thought about the times you made them feel understood without trying. The moments you noticed what others overlooked. The strange comfort they feel in your presence, even when nothing extraordinary is happening. And suddenly they realized something that nearly took their breath away. You have become the emotional standard by which they now measure everything else. No connection feels the same after you. No interaction lands the same after you. No shallow attention satisfies the heart once it has tasted depth. That is why they have seemed different. Because once someone experiences a connection that reaches beyond surface attraction, ordinary no longer feels enough. They are not just missing you when you are absent. They are comparing every other experience to what they feel when you are near. And nothing quite matches. That truth frightened them at first. Because dependence was never the goal. Need was never the plan. Falling this deeply was never supposed to happen. Yet here they are. Thinking of futures they never used to imagine. Replaying your words long after conversations end. Wondering whether you understand even a fraction of what you have awakened in them. And then they did something they had never done before. They opened up to someone they trust completely, someone who knows them well enough to hear the truth beneath their words. They confessed what had been happening internally. The confusion. The fear. The intensity. The way this connection keeps growing no matter how much they try to stay composed. And after listening quietly, that person said something simple, but unforgettable. You are not confused. You are scared because this matters. That sentence broke through every excuse. Because confusion can be debated. Mixed signals can be analyzed. Timing can be blamed. But when fear is the real issue, all the disguises fall away. They are not uncertain about you. They are uncertain about how to handle something this meaningful without ruining it. Read that again in your spirit. Their hesitation is not because they feel nothing. It is because they feel too much. And now that they are finally facing that truth, their behavior is beginning to change. Maybe you have already noticed it. A shift in the way they look at you. A softness in their energy. A deeper thoughtfulness in how they speak. A strange tension, as if they are holding back words that want to escape. That is not your imagination. That is what happens when someone is carrying emotions too heavy to keep hidden forever. Something important is waiting for you. Because later that same day, after hours of reflection, they made a private promise to themselves. A promise no one else heard. They said, I cannot keep treating this like something that might not matter. If this is real, then I need to stop standing in my own way. That was the turning point. Not because everything changed instantly. Not because they rushed into dramatic action. But because inwardly, the resistance began to crumble. And once resistance falls inside a person, outer action is only a matter of time. They began thinking differently after that. No longer asking, what if this goes wrong? Now asking, What if I lose something rare because I was too afraid to try? No longer focused on protecting themselves from disappointment, now focused on protecting the possibility of something extraordinary. That mental shift changes everything. Because once someone moves from fear-based avoidance to intentional pursuit, their energy transforms. They stop drifting. They start deciding. And your soulmate is entering that phase now. But here is what makes this even more powerful. They are not only thinking about how much they want you. They are thinking about whether they are becoming the kind of person worthy of the connection they hope to build with you. That is why they have been reflecting more. Growing more. Trying to mature emotionally in quiet ways no one else notices. Because loving you has not just stirred their feelings. It has challenged them to evolve. Real love does that. It does not simply make a person emotional, it makes them better, if they allow it. And you, without even realizing it, have become the mirror through which they see who they could become. But despite all this growth, despite all this clarity, despite everything awakening inside them, there is still one final barrier left. One fear remains stronger than all the others. The fear that when they finally reveal the full depth of what they feel, you may not feel the same. That fear is the last chain holding them back. Because it is one thing to carry deep emotions in private. It is another thing entirely to place them in someone else's hands. And in the next part, you'll hear what sign made them begin to believe their feelings may actually be returned, the moment that caused their final doubt to start collapsing. And why after that moment, they could no longer hide behind silence the way they once did.